Let us now cross over for that event coming up today as we mark World Consumer Rights Day. It's at the Coconut Grove Hotel. Let's cross over now.
Virtually. So that's what's going to happen, and subsequently we'll end the program successfully. So as we move on, we'll quickly go for a goodwill message from our patron who is joining us virtually, Professor Stephen Adine. Let's put our hands together to welcome our patron as he gives us a goodwill message.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, from beautiful home. I wish I could be with you this morning, but prior engagement means I must be in the court this morning. I'm glad that CIMG has risen up to the big question of consumer celebration. When the UN established, it had in mind the fact that in the world, everybody is a and the assembly at the end of the day, everyone is a group. Let's finish. That's bomba written by Taylor Pierce. He had a interesting first stage. That of the is everybody. World of peace. By what you our choice that it makes wealth of nations. Not all folks have founded the capacity themselves, and then they become, and that's where now go ahead and started this global funding must come in and setting that every of itself and the product receives. At this moment, GSTM is clean energy. One of the areas that we in Africa must focus in. When it comes to clean and potential, we have the biggest advantage in the sense that God has placed all of Africa in the tropical zone.
We apologize for that, ladies and gentlemen. We're having connectivity challenges. So what we're going to do is that we will just pause on his goodwill message for now and continue with the program. Hopefully by the time that we're set for the panel discussions before that, we hope that we'll have a very clean line. Then we can talk to him or he can give us his message once again. So moving on, we'll officially get the welcome address from the National President of the CIMG, Dr. Kasati. Let's put our hands together to welcome Dr. Kasati for the official welcome.
Thank you, George. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Members of the Governing Council, Professor Stephen Adair, who is a past president, a fellow and patron of the Institute, who is joining us virtually, distinguished panelists, our media partners, Joy News of the Multimedia Group, members of the CIMG, marketing students from both traditional and technical universities joining us virtually, and those of you who are here present, media men and women physically present and also joining virtually. Good morning to you all. Before I begin, may I ask all of us to be upstanding to observe 1 minute silent memory. Please, let's be upstanding. 1 minute silence in memory of the late Mr. Frank Appiah, a founding member and the first national president of the CIMG, who sadly passed on to glory 2 nights ago. May his soul rest in perfect peace. Please be seated. Thank you. As indicated by the MC, the subject of consumer rights here certainly was started by JFK, President Kennedy, based on 4 key pillars, which eventually were expanded into 8 pillars. Today, as we speak, Consumers International, a membership organization for consumer groups around the world, adopted these rights as a charter and started recognizing 15th March as World Consumer Rights Day. This day is now observed every year with the aim of raising global awareness about consumer rights and needs, as well as a day for empowering and championing the rights of consumers everywhere around the globe. The theme for this year's commemoration is empowering consumers through clean energy transitions. Recent increases in the cost of energy and the adverse impact of energy generation on the environment has made it necessary for our generation to work at empowering consumers to choose low carbon and less harmful energy sources. This requires adjustments and rapid transitions by consumers to new and cleaner types of energy that guarantees sustainability, security, and affordability in the long term. In Ghana, there is no known overarching consumer protection legislation, despite the different challenges consumers face, from product safety, guarantees, packaging, misleading advertising, to organizations dodging responsibility, among others. No consumer wants to take home a product that causes harm or unintentional damage. Consumers must understand that they have a right to be heard and a right to redress. Many product categories have mandatory safety standards determined in Ghana here by the Ghana Standards Authority, the Food and Drugs Authority, which pertain to such issues as packaging, chemical composition, ingredients, etc. We must proceed from here as a nation to recognize that consumers have certain fundamental rights, including the right to safety, the right to be informed, the right to choose, the right to be heard, the right for a pollution-free environment, among others. There are other rights endorsed by the United Nations through the United Nations Guidelines for Consumer Protection that we need to be aware of as a people. By respecting and protecting these rights, businesses and institutions can build trust and credibility with their consumers. The success of businesses depend on prioritizing the needs and interests of their consumers and engaging in ethical and responsible practices. The right to satisfaction, as endorsed by the UN, demands that people have access to basic goods and services. Adequate food, clothing, shelter, healthcare, education, electricity, water, clean air, fresh water, unpolluted rivers, undegraded lands and forests. When consumers are satisfied with an organization's products and services, I can guarantee you that there will be fewer complaints and consequently there will be drastic reduction in lawsuits against organizations. As a society, if we can get to this point where we always put the total interest of consumer rights first, Ghana will be a better place to live. What are the expectations of CIMG as we commemorate this day? CIMG has chosen to amplify the importance of consumer rights and the need for continuous discussion in order to make positive impact in the lives of consumers here in Ghana. As a professional marketing body, which is mandated under Section 3E of the Chartered Institute of Marketing Ghana Act 2020 at 1021, we are instituting this day to be observed by both consumers and corporate organizations and institutions that are responsible for providing goods and services. Going forward, the CIMG will lead the conversation and continue to amplify and champion the rights of consumers. All organizations, including civil and public service entities and central government, must acknowledge and respect these rights unconditionally. The corner shop trader and the market man or woman must respect these rights. Ministries, departments, and agencies, as well as metropolitan, municipal, and district assemblies, likewise must respect these rights. Our good friends in the security services must see the citizens as patrons of their services and also respect these rights. Mining and quarrying companies must respect our right to cleaner and fresher rivers and vegetation cover by respecting these rights. Employers must provide recreational facilities for their employees as they need to exercise regularly, rejuvenate, and free their minds for improved work and productivity. Employers must be concerned about the food they provide for their employees in their office canteens, less fatty foods, low sugar content, alcohol and tobacco-free environment, among others. All these and more are consumer rights issues that we must address always. It is time for enacting adequate legislation to protect the rights of consumers in Ghana. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that this is enough to set the tone for today's discussions. Our eminent panelists are ready to dissect this subject from different viewpoints. Before I take my seat, however, let me announce here that the second edition of the Ghana Customer Satisfaction Index 2022 report is ready to be outdoored in the coming weeks. So also, excitedly, is Ghana's first ever regional brand index, which has been compiled by the CIMG. The dates for launching these reports will be announced very soon. From the Governing Council and the entire membership of the CIMG, I welcome you to today's all-important program, and I urge you to be very active participants so that you will leave here as very strong advocates for consumer rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kasati, who is the national president of the CIMG. Once again, let's put our hands together for him. We are live on Joy News, so anybody watching us live on Joy News, so you can tell your colleagues who wish to be here, but unfortunately cannot be here, that we are live on Joy News. Let's go back to our patron, Professor Stephen Adai. This time around, we hope that the line will be very favorable to us. We're doing it more on the audio version rather than the video version. So his goodwill message once again. Yes.
Should I go now? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, compatriots. It's good that the CIMG is celebrating World Consumers Day today. It is unfortunate that I'm not being able to be with you because I have to be in Ho at this time. But it's good for us enjoying the fact that today is the World Consumers Day. In fact, it's an anomaly when we talk about Consumers Day because everybody, even the producers of goods and services, at one time or the other are consumers. And therefore, every one of us must be interested in the rights and protection of consumers. The reality is that oftentimes, most of the consumers don't have the capacity or the wherewithal in order to protect themselves. And that is where institutions like CIMG should be in the vanguard of consumer rights and protection. Let me say that there's often the emphasis on production of services and of goods, but the consumer is the king. And as one of the writers, Dr. Taylor Pierce of Sierra Leone, has mentioned, the consumer is not only the king, but also the queen, the president, and the chief. It's unfortunate that oftentimes he becomes the victim of unscrupulous producers of goods and services. For us as a nation, we must also take World Consumers Day very serious because the wealth of nations is ultimately determined by its consumption pattern. You can see that the developed countries consume what they produce and export to us, while developing countries tend to be mere consumers and not producers, especially of manufactured goods and modern services. It is therefore important for us to embrace Consumer Day not only as a right so that people are not cheated, but also that if we consume what we produce, we are creating wealth for ourselves and our people and for employment. Therefore, in either way, consumption is the pivot of economic progress. I wish everybody a successful Consumer Rights Day today, and I trust that this is going to be the beginning of a big play of CIMG, which I'm privileged to be your patron, to champion the rights of consumers in this country, both of locally manufactured goods and imported goods, that quality and meeting the standards will become the order of the day. I wish you a pleasant gathering and discussions and the beginning of a new era of consumer rights in Ghana. I thank you.
Thank you very much. That was Professor Stephen Adai, the patron of CIMG, with his goodwill message to all of us. Now let's move to the real caboodle. And I'm going to introduce our panel members. I'll introduce them one after the other, after which they will have 5 minutes each for their opening statements. Then we'll engage them. I'll ask them questions based on the theme and some of the things, the presentations they'll be giving to us within their opening statements. Then we can also extend the platform to you here and those also watching us virtually to ask them questions too. Our first panel member, a dynamic and transformational business leader with over 20 years of solid track record of building strong business fundamentals that drive sustainable values across the entire business value chain. C-suite executive with 10 years progressive broad-level experience with leading multinationals within the FMCG space and at multicultural environment. He worked and has worked all over the West African sub-region, including AMP Foods Nigeria and SC Johnson & Son Incorporated, building and inspiring, of course, energizing teams, organizations with purpose and direction, driving game-changing business transformational objects and projects to drive efficiency, cost containment, and repositioning and repurpose organization back onto a sustainable growth. Building, driving an integrated commercial strategy, planning and execution in core consumer marketing, customer marketing, and sales function, and a strong general management experience. Ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together for our first panel member, Kwame Wiafe. Next is a multiple award-winning marketing expert with over 30 years experience, gained in fields of FMCG and telecommunication industries, including blue chip companies such as Millicom International Cellular, now Airtel Tigo, Guinness Ghana Brewery Limited, Vodafone Ghana Limited, and most recently at Nyao Medical Center. Expertise in marketing focuses on keeping the consumer at the heart of business decisions while driving profitable and shareholder value. She has participated in various leadership and business dialogues in Kenya, Nigeria, Egypt, Cameroon, South Africa, Greece, Portugal, and Spain, with extended expertise and executive roles in the UK, and of course in Namibia, and for that matter, Africa as a whole. She has served on boards of directors of Guinness Ghana Brewery Limited and on the Vodafone Foundation board. She holds a BA honors and an MBA degree, both from the University of Ghana. Ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together for our second panel member, Agnes Emefa Asa. Next is managing consultant of the Family Office Africa. He started his career as a solicitor and the director at Lewisham Law Center in England, and has played a lot of roles in England concerning his legal profession. Former Group Head of Legal and Company Secretary Opportunities International for 2010, former Group Head of Legal and Company Secretary Vodafone Ghana 2014, holds a postgraduate diploma in risk compliance from International Compliance Association in England. He holds an MBA in Wealth Management and Finance from Manchester Business School in England. He's currently pursuing a PhD in Business Leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together for our third panel member, Theodore Albright. And then the final one. He's a business strategist, he's a lawyer, and he's a pastor. Very interesting combination. He holds a BA Industrial Arts, a postgraduate diploma Industrial Management, MBA Marketing, LLB, that's Bachelor's of Law, and also a barrister at law. He's a chartered marketer. He's currently a consultant general manager for the Ministry of Trade and Industries and Ghana Enterprise Agency under the Business Resource Center project. He leads a team of business consultants in providing institutional support and business development services to small and micro businesses within the partnership framework of government, international donors, and private sector stakeholders. Ladies and gentlemen, our fourth panel member, let's put our hands together, Reverend Manford Jessa Luthrot. Let's put our hands together. So like I mentioned, we're going to take a 5 minutes opening statement from them, after which I will engage them for some minutes. Then you also have the opportunity to ask them questions. In the same order as I introduced them, we'll welcome first Kwame Wiafe.
Good morning. Good morning. And the patron, the governing board, and management of CIMG Ghana, distinguished panelists, distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to be invited here today to share my perspective on consumer rights and protection in the FMCG space in Ghana. First of all, I want to commend CIMG for taking on this responsibility to bring visibility, awareness on consumer rights in Ghana. I think as a country, something that we have taken for granted for so long, to the extent that as we speak, there is no omnibus law that offers protection to consumers in Ghana. So I think it is worthwhile that CIMG has taken on this responsibility to bring advocacy, awareness, such that hopefully in the shortest possible time, there will be a law to safeguard consumer rights and protection in Ghana. That said, I think a bit has been said about me. I'm Kwame Wiafe. I've worked my entire life in the FMCG space. If you talk of FMCG, fast-moving consumer goods products, basically these are basic products that we all use to meet our daily needs. Usually in the FMCG space, we have manufacturers as the pivot of that industry. Manufacturers who produce these goods and make them available for the consumer. Across the value chain of the FMCG, therefore, you have suppliers who typically will supply raw materials and input to the manufacturers. You have the manufacturers who will produce these goods. And then we also have the distribution chain. Basically, the distribution channel that enable the products that have been produced by FMCG companies to be made available to the consumer. If you look at the distribution landscape of typical FMCG, or if you look at the FMCG, you can broadly group them into 4 teams. We have the manufactured food side, you have the beverages side, you have home care, and you have personal care. So basically, all players in FMCG work across these 4 broad dynamics. And as I've already mentioned, the companies that produce these goods become the owners and therefore custodians of rights of all the products that are sold on the market. Now, when we come to consumer rights, I'm sure we have a legal person here, and so he will give us a better perspective of how the rights and protection are expressed in Ghana. But just to give a perspective that consumer right is basically to say it is a legitimate expectation of a consumer to an acceptable product. A legitimate expectation of a consumer that the product that he's going to buy will meet certain basic standard of quality, of quantity, of potency, of price, and all other dynamics. And then more importantly, that should there be any deviation, the consumer has the right to seek redress and to seek restitution or replacement or whatever the regime may be. Consumer protection, on the other hand, talks about the institutional framework to enforce the inherent consumer rights. That is to say, it is a matter of public policy, it is a matter of law. And usually, consumer protection is expressed in law, in institutions, in advocacy, and in self-regulatory environment. If you look at the FMCG space in Ghana, what are the typical concerns or complaints about consumer rights challenges in Ghana? Typically, the challenges relate to the product itself that consumers buy, various issues with the product itself. It also relates to the service around the product, and then it also relates to the after-sale service of the product. with respect to the product itself, some of the challenges that attend to consumer rights in Ghana include, first of all, just basic legibility or readability of information that have been provided on pack. If a typical consumer needs to have full information about the product that he's buying to be able to make the right information. However, because either because of low enforcement, there isn't much visibility on the readability of information that are provided on pack in most products, especially relating to imported products. And most of it, if you take the pack, is even just not visible enough to be read. There is also issue of sale of expired, unwholesome products in the market. There are various instances where either the producers or the distributors of products tinker with the expiry date of the product and try to make the product still available for consumers to buy in Ghana. And this is commonplace in the market. There is also issue of weight management of product. In view of economic challenges, some producers try to deal with the weight, either in liters or kilograms. Either they will reduce the weight and offer the same product. In some cases, where there is visibility about the weight, there is no problem. Or where there is credibility of the weight, there is no problem. But we have instances where companies are offering less weight and claiming the same weight. And that means that the consumer is being shortchanged. There is issue about compromising the quality of product, using substandard ingredients to produce, just to save cost. It's also a real issue in the marketplace. So these are issues relating to the product itself. When it comes to the product, that is the product experience, there is a real challenge of poor quality service at the shop, at the point of purchase. Most consumers don't get the right service when they make themselves available to buy product from the shops. And then if there is issue with the product, there's also a real challenge of seeking replacement. I think it's a cliche for you to read. In most shops, goods sold are not returnable. Or in some cases, if they offer to return, they will tell you goods can only be returned within 24 hours or 48 hours, which is a real challenge because in some cases, before the consumer will pick the goods to use, the 24 hours or the 48 hour is already gone. So that is also a real challenge. And then also, there is also a real challenge for the consumer, even if he wants to avail his rights as to how to do that, what mechanism, where to go to, who to go to, is also a real challenge. So these are some of the challenges that attend to consumer rights with respect to the FMCG space in Ghana. Now, why are these challenges pervasive? Why are they available? They are available because of what I call, first of all, weak strategic orientation of the country. I believe consumer rights protection ties in strongly into the orientation of the country to offer good service to the citizenry. And because that orientation, unfortunately, is weak in Ghana, it allows, for example, for importation of various substandard goods into Ghana. The reason why most shops will tell you goods sold are not returnable is because most of the products that shoppers sell are not produced in Ghana. And therefore, if they should take them back, they do not have any recourse to the supplier. And more also, it is also easier for anybody to import products, even with wrong labeling, sometimes foreign labeling, Arabic labeling, languages that the ordinary consumer cannot even read into the country. And there are no enforcement mechanism. I dare say that if Ghana is to take its citizenry seriously and want to enforce consumer rights, it could even tie into promoting a lot of made in Ghana products, because I can confirm that most of the established companies, credible companies in Ghana, would or do try to make sure that they offer appropriate consumer rights to the consumers. Another challenge I see is also about weak protection mechanism by established institutions already in the system. I've already mentioned, we do have some institutions that attempt to deal with consumer rights in Ghana. We have the Food and Drugs Authority, we have the Ghana Standard Authority. These institutions are there to try to deal with consumer protections issues in Ghana. Unfortunately, as I've said, either as a result of unwillingness or inability or lack of the political will, these institutions close their eyes to some of these basic infractions and allow the market to be flooded with a whole lot of substandard, unacceptable products, and the enforcement mechanism is usually very weak. Another challenge that I see is also about the political economy, and it is tied to the institutions. So we have a lot of weak standard products, low standard products in Ghana, but the question is there a political will to deal with it? I believe that is also weak, because in most cases, the political elite or the ruling political establishment do not want to be cast in the bad light. Or, in some cases, some of their sponsors are the people bringing in some of these substandard products. So it becomes difficult for this to be dealt with appropriately. And then, finally, there is lack of defined consumer guarantees in Ghana. So if you are a consumer and you go and buy a product and the product is defective, what do you do? There are no defined guarantees as to what you do. If you are lucky and the product you bought is from an established company like Nestle or Unilever, you may have some cause of redress. You could approach these companies, and I know that some of these established companies inherently for business sustenance and continuity and to protect their credibility would come to your aid and meet your, try to address the need. But if it is outside of these established players, then there is no recourse to the consumer. And then the consumer, if he has the appetite and the resources, will need to go through painful legal process that most people shy away with. So legitimately, there is no simple guaranteed process for an average consumer whose rights have been infringed upon, who has bought substandard goods, who have bought unwholesome product, who have bought substandard weight product, to seek redress. And I think this is something that has to be addressed if we need to protect the right of consumers in Ghana. What is the way forward? I think there has been recent attempts to put in place a law. I'm aware a draft law is available. I will encourage for the law to be promulgated as soon as possible. But before the law is promulgated, I will encourage that deeper consultations are made to the law. I believe that I am a player in the industry, but I do not think that enough consultations have been made to the law. And I think that since the law has not been passed, it should be extended, and both consumers and players in the industry should be consulted to make sure that we come out with something that will stand the test of time. And finally, I think the state actors that are clothed with the responsibility to protect consumer rights need to be up and doing. I think to a large extent, they are failing the consumers in Ghana. I believe they have the legal framework, they have the resources, the wherewithal, to be able to do a bit more than they are doing to safeguard the rights of consumers. And I think the earlier they do that, the better it is for all of us as consumers in Ghana. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rafi. And let's put our hands together once again for him as we move on. And I mean, one thing he talked about concerning labeling, it's something for me, I think, in Ghana we should be very serious about. I spent some time in some Asian country, and when you go to their shops to buy products, you can't even read anything on that product because it's not written in English. It's only for their market, and it's written in that Asian language. But when you come to our part here, there are some shops you go in there, there is nothing on that labeling that is even written in English. Yet we allow it to be in our shops, and I think it's something we need to look at. We're also live on Facebook. That's the Chartered Institute of Marketing Ghana, Facebook Live. So you can just quickly go to the CIMG page and just share that page individually on your page and to others too. And also live on Joy News. Like I mentioned earlier, Kwame Wiafi spoke to us coming from the fast-moving consumer goods point of view. Next is going to be on healthcare, still on the same theme we're talking on. So let's put our hands together to welcome Agnes MFA Essa.
So good morning, everybody. I think all protocols are already observed, but I'd like to just acknowledge the Governing Council, and I'm really proud that CIMG has taken this thing as an important day that we can institute. Because as Kwame Wiafi said, the previous speaker, there's very little awareness about, consumer rights in this country. And I've had the privilege of working across various industries, alcohol in terms of Guinness Ghana Breweries, as well as telecommunications, Vodafone Ghana, and now in healthcare. And it's across that there's a lot more work that needs to be done in terms of reinforcing, collaborating, and raising awareness about this topic. So, but before I go on, just when we say healthcare, it's very broad. The value chain, includes suppliers as well, pharmaceutical industry, there's, the hospitals, the clinics, it's huge. And then the allied health in terms of laboratory and diagnostics. But I'll focus a bit more on the hospital and the clinic side, because that's where I've had a bit of a exposure. And so I think Kwame Wiafi said it, what are the rights? When you say rights, what does that really mean? I mean, everybody who buys into anything, whether it's a service or a product, has a legitimate wish that whatever they are buying is what you say it is. But I think it is also important to know that when there are rights, there's also the issue of responsibility. And many people don't recognize that even the consumer has a responsibility in playing, in understanding and enjoying the rights that are available. My topic is about the enforcement of consumer rights in the healthcare industry. So before I go on to talk about what structures there are currently that govern the industry, I'll just talk a little bit about what are some of the rights that anyone who is a patient should think about. And we talk about the fact that the world has moved into a place where it's no longer just about the patient, but it's also about the family. Because sometimes the patient is in a state where they can't even really communicate, but the family is also involved in that care. So every person, all of us could be a patient at any point in time, need access to quality basic health care, quality, and then information of what your condition is. It should not be kept, you should not be kept in the dark. You should know what you are dealing with. And then you should also have the right to know who the identity of your caregivers are. You need to have the right to be able to consent or decline to participate in anything that you don't want to participate in. At least you need to understand if it's surgery or whatever it is, you need to have the right to say yes or no. Privacy during consultation treatment is also very important because nobody wants their information to be discussed in full view of everybody else. So confidentiality is a key right that all patients desire. The other thing that is important is clarity and understanding of how much you need to spend on this particular procedure that you're going through. And then every patient has the right for a second medical opinion. So if you're not happy about what you're being told or you're not very sure, nothing stops you from seeking a medical opinion elsewhere to be sure that, okay, this is what you're being told is right. But as I've said, it also goes with responsibilities. So for it to work, a patient or anyone who's seeking care in the healthcare industry must cooperate with the healthcare provider. You must ask questions, but you should also have full disclosure of what your medical history is. Because we had some situations during the COVID era where people came in, they had COVID, they knew they had COVID, but they didn't say it. And so transparency from the patient or the consumer side is also important so that the healthcare providers give you the best care. The other thing that is important is complying with the prescribed medication. Because if you're given medication that is to be taken a particular way, and it doesn't, really follow, you don't follow it, then you will not get the best benefit. And if there's anything that is in your situation in terms of your adverse reaction or whatever to the medication, you have the responsibility to inform the healthcare provider. So these are just a few of the rights and responsibilities which I think is important as the law and so on becomes established. People should be able to be aware, to be able to make use of these in order to get the best health care. And so what are some of the enforcement regulations that we have? And I think my previous speaker also mentioned the fact that advocacy, self-regulation, and promulgation of laws is important. And so in all the industries I've worked, self-regulation has been critical for us. So, for instance, in the health industry, you do have health services regulation agencies. You have HEFRA, you have Nurses Midwifery Council, you have the Ghana Dental Medical Association, Pharmaceutical Council. They're all there. So they provide some form of guidance. But what is critical is that even for the health institutions themselves, you have your own code of ethics that you establish. So for example, I'll give an example. In Yahoo Medical Center, reaches out to International Finance Corporation, the health section, as well as Joint Commission International. These are international bodies who come to help to structure and put in place policies, because even the staff need to understand what are the rights that the customers have and what are the rights that they have, even to ensure that there's safety and there's zero harm. And so these bodies help with structuring, putting in place things to monitor, things to report on, and things like near misses are used as learning opportunities. So if there was water and somebody could have fallen, that's an opportunity to be recorded, to listen, to see how else can you improve on things like that. So these regulatory bodies are, very important. And so whilst we wait for a law for Ghanaians to be able to really take advantage of, these are the ways that as a body, even with Chartered Institute of Marketing, we should be able to sensitize other organizations, particularly smaller organizations, because in the multinationals and so on, it is very clear that there's always the guidance from headquarters and so on. But how much more if we took up these things ourselves and ensure that people to ways to self-regulate. So until the law fully comes into place, you can still self-regulate, and that's important. But what does that mean in terms of future? Because as technology changes, and we even experienced it during the COVID era with telemedicine and all these things happening, and the role of telecommunications in healthcare means that data privacy and security is becoming even more important, because your data will be shared across multiple channels, ensuring that it's safeguarded and is protected so that the people don't have access to it is one of the things that is going to be very critical as we go into the future. The other thing that is important is for laws to be able to stay abreast with what is happening, because we're at the stage where we're now still trying to figure out and establish a proper law for consumer protection for Ghana, and yet things are moving at a fast pace. So when you talk about technology changes, social media and all these things, that has to be included in the law, and then adapted, because things are happening all the time. Regulation is, moving, not the regulation, but the social media is moving at a very fast rate, and therefore we need to be able to incorporate all these things so that people's data and privacy is still secure across multiple channels. So the only other thing I want to say here before I end is that I think that consumer advocacy groups is going to continue to be very critical. And I would encourage that as much as possible, everybody, all of us are consumers. So when we see anybody driving any consumer agenda, we should feel free to participate, contribute, and support the cause, because that's the only way that you would also be protected. Today it may not be your turn, but another day it could be your turn, because all of us could either be a consumer or a patient at any point in time. And so just to round up, I just want to reiterate the point that this is a very important topic. I have had the chance of working in 3 industries, and it's definitely important across all those industries. even though I've seen that in the multinationals, they draw a lot of guidance from the foreign headquarters and so on. I'm happy to say that companies like Yahoo Medical and others are also leaning in and working with international bodies to understand what is going on in the world and to do their best. The whole idea is to continue to improve as a person who's offering a service every day, to improve so that the customers and our patients and all of us can get the best care possible, because that is our right and we should ask for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let's do it again once again for her. A friend visited a hospital, one big hospital in Ghana, and during treatment, Agnes, this friend decided to ask questions. And the doctor was like, Charlie, who kasadodo? He wanted to know exactly what the doctor is doing, what kind of medication and all that. The doctor said, you are not a medical doctor, I'm the doctor. Well, he was giving whatever prescription. Unfortunately for him, he didn't take it until he used a different medical facility where he was allowed to ask questions. When we get to that stage, we'll see how best we can explore further. Now we'll move to the next stage, which is got to do with telecommunication. And let's put our hands together to welcome Theodore Albright to give us that presentation.
Thank you. I'm going to stand on the previous protocols and just say this. Opening statement. The wealth of our nation is predicated on consumption, because consumption is a key driver of economic development. The wealth of our nation is predicated on consumption, because consumption is a key driver of economic development. Where is the champion, the voice for the voiceless? In the age of communication, I have no champion. I have no avenue to communicate my complaints in a coordinated, cohesive fashion. Isn't that ironic? And yet, that is what we're presented with, because we're not given an opportunity. We don't have an opportunity to have a champion, a singular champion, whose role is to speak on our behalf. And so, because there are disparate channels of complaints, it gets lost in the noise. In this digital age, where technology is ubiquitous, AI, blockchain, platform technology, communication is now a human right. Accessibility, affordability, availability, awareness must come as standard. I'm speaking on the subject of consumer rights and telephony. Internet, value-added services, mobile money, big data, digital. And frankly, like Agnes said, technology, and by that I also mean telephony and telecoms, is so pervasive in the area of health, banking, education, travel, work, commuting, industry. It is ubiquitous. And yet we have no champion to stand and speak on our behalf. And frankly, the current situation is rather reactionary at worst, anticipatory at best, and there's no proactivity. Yes, we have the NCA, that great Leviathan beast. But if I lose 20 cedis on mobile money or my data, am I seriously going to make a complaint to the NCA? Come on, guys. Yes, I might reach out to the telco once or twice or 3 times, but when you get frustrated and there's nobody to voice out your frustrations, you're left to pick up the pieces. And you do what? Nothing. So yes, there is a complaints procedure with all of the telcos. And if you don't succeed, you can go to the NCA. But like I said, if I lose 20 cedis, am I going to go to the NCA? If I lose 10 cedis, am I going to go to the NCA? If I keep canceling my subscription for that ringtone and it keeps coming back, am I going to go to the NCA? Come on. We need a champion, one who will stand up for us and say, come and let me speak on your behalf. And that is why this channel, this platform is critical. Well done and kudos to you, CIMG. It is critical because unless I have confidence in the products I use and the services I use, I ain't going to spend my money. I'm not going to spend my money. And we're not going to see the concomitant development that ought to take place. How is it that some organizations, institutions, can give lifetime warranties on their products, and you can barely walk out of a shop before your guarantee expires? Before you unwrap it, your guarantee has expired, your warranty has expired. Yes, the consumers have rights when it comes to digital telephony and the telcos. Right to access, right to a variety of services, settle some claims, opt out of unsolicited messages, privacy, notice of interruption, compensation. Please, hands up. How many of you in the last 30 days who have had network issues, who have had drop calls, have had the nerve to call up the telco and say, guys, uprame? Nobody does, because the existing channels, quite frankly, are not fit for purpose. And when you don't have an avenue to complain, then in the end, you won't spend. So again, I say, where is the champion? That champion ought to be in a commission, ombudsman. Where is Kofi Kapito? With total transparency. Processes are opaque, they're disjointed. I really don't know where to go. I really don't know if I have a complaint, save for maybe phony star, I don't know where to go. And I'm certainly, really, truly, honestly, if it's not a lot of money, going to go to the NCA, because it's not worth my while. So who is going to support the small person, the small business, the man who can't speak for himself? We've talked about self-regulation. And at the moment, that is what we have, because we don't have an all-encompassing, cohesive Consumer Protection Act. It's a bill, it's coming, but it ain't here yet. But you see, I speak to the telcos, and I want to go beyond the telcos and speak to industry and speak to SMEs in general. There is sustainable competitive advantage if I can trust in the product and service that you're offering me. Word of mouth will travel 1 mile for good service and 7 miles for bad service. If I have a bad experience, I'm going to tell everybody. The network drop. As for here, be blank spot. As it be like the tower, no, they work for here. Huh? Echuni be an meaning, and ye Jumawaha. Enra may to 1 cedi, and then I come in 20 pesos, and I haven't made any calls. You know, fundamentally, the bulk of the users and the consumers sit within the bottom of the pyramid. How are their rights going to be addressed? Who's going to do that for them? Sustainable competitive advantage, reputation in terms of character and capability and competence has a value, and you can add it to your value proposition. Good enough is no longer good enough, guys. And I'm not bashing any telco. I'm just saying that systemically we have no structures. Everything is opaque. Nothing is transparent. You know, to the extent that when you look at the SDGs, poverty, hunger, health, education, gender, clean water, clean energy, decent work, innovation, inequality reduction, sustainable cities, responsible consumption, climate change, climate action, below water, above water, all of these are predicated on that channel platform called telephony. And so our friends in the telco sector are in an enviable position to be the backdrop and the backbone for our infrastructure development, economic recovery, if they will. So let me paint a picture for you before I go. A world where my 10 pesos is accounted for, my 20 cedis is accounted for. A world where I know my rights because it's not shrouded in opacity and it's transparent. A world where I know I have a champion who's going to speak on my behalf. A world where I know that the service levels that have been promised will be delivered. Quality, safety, education, value, choice, privacy, all of these are within my purview. And I repeat, with the ubiquity of technology, unless we have a champion across board, but my brief is to speak on the telcos, unless we have a champion who speaks for us in the telephony sector, then we will have problems growing to become the Ghana that we ought to be. And I'll take questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leo. Let's put our hands together once again for Theo. Thank you very much. I think yesterday and 2 days ago, there's a particular telecommunication network here in Ghana. It was difficult for you to make a call. It was difficult for you to even send mobile money. And then just thinking about we Ghanaians is that it's normal. Everybody's quiet. We're fine. Nobody's talking. Let's move on. And the danger for us as a country is when we begin to see some of these things as normal. That's where the danger is, because a time will come where the wrong things will be normal for all of us. And building a society like this, there's no good future for such a society. So this morning, we're starting a new day. Everything is fine because the problem has been resolved. It's normal. Let's move on. But sometimes those normal things actually cost us a lot as a nation. Let's move on. This time around, it's going to be on the legal perspective. And let's put our hands together to welcome the Reverend Manford Jessa Luthrot. He is a business strategist. He's a lawyer and a pastor. That's a great combination, I would say.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Mr. Chairman, members of CMJ Governing Council, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I also want to stand on the protocols that have already been established. And it is a great honor to be part of this conversation or the discussion this day, even as we mark the World Consumer Rights Day. I think a lot have been said by the panelists and, of course, by the moderator as well. We need to focus our conversation and our discussion on the subject of consumer rights. And the various speakers have given us indication as to what constitutes a consumer. And I believe that a consumer, in a more stricter sense, and for our conversation today, maybe can be defined as someone who buys or acquires goods or services for direct use or ownership rather than for resale or use in production and manufacturing. Of course, there are institutional buyers or institutional consumers, there are organizational consumers and all that, but I believe that we want to be looking at, in the stricter sense, the end user or the final consumer as individual members of the society. From the point of view of the law, rights can be seen or can be looked at from different perspectives. Rights basically are the fundamental norms or normative rules about what is allowed of a person or a people and what is owed to a people. So what is allowed to a people or to a person and what is owed to a people or a person according to some legal systems or according to some social convention or ethical theory. So rights are derived from legal systems, rights may be derived from social conventions, and rights may be derived from ethical theory. And they constitute the fundamental normative rules or principles that a person is allowed or that is owed to a person or a group of people. And up to this point, I think we've all been made to realize that we are all consumers in one way or the other. At any point, everyone is a consumer of a commodity or a service of a sort. So we all are consumers. And so when we're talking about consumer rights, it's about everybody. It's about everybody. AFTA is with us. And as we know, AFTA is looking at a market of a population of about 1.3 billion. And all these 1.3 billion people that we are talking about consumption, people who are going to consume goods and services. And as it has been said by the previous speakers, consumption patterns and actually consumer behavior directly and indirectly impacts on the wealth of nations. So it is very important for us to seriously look at the rights of the consumer, because at the end of the day, if a producer or a manufacturer produces a commodity or an item, it is expected that the commodity that is produced will be consumed by or will be bought or acquired or used by an end user or a consumer. So this is how we need to approach the subject of rights in the context of what we are going to talk about today. Now, when we talk about a contract of sale of goods in particular is a contract whereby the seller agrees. It is an arrangement between a seller and a buyer. So a contract of sale of goods is a contract whereby the seller agrees to transfer. Okay, the seller agrees to transfer the property in the goods to the buyer for a consideration, which is called the price. So when somebody is selling a commodity or an item, I am interested to buy that item, and maybe the price that he puts out is, let's say, 100 Ghana cedis, but I said, I can offer you 80 Ghana cedis for this item. And the seller agrees to sell to me that item at 80 Ghana cedis. At that point, a contract has been established. A contract has been formed between me, who is the buyer, and then the seller. And once this transaction is regulated by a contract, then there are some legal underpinnings to the transactional relationship between the buyer and the seller. And so it is important for us to address the fact that the consumer has rights. Because at the point that the contract is formed between the seller and the buyer, and the contract is formed, then it creates some rights, it creates some duties, it creates some obligations for the parties. So once there is a contract of sale between a seller and a buyer, it creates some legal relationships. And based on this legal relationship, there are rights, there are obligations, there are duties, there are responsibilities of each party to ensure that the transactions or the contract that have been formed between the parties are enforced. And in fact, in contracts, there are also, by law, capacity to buy and sell. So nobody, you cannot just sell anything at any age or if you don't have the capacity. So capacity gives you that legal power to be able to engage in transactions. And in Ghana, such legal transactions are regulated by law. From what we have heard from the previous speakers, it appears that we are very much concerned about some omnibus laws or some laws that are really put together, to address specifically consumer protection and consumer rights. I must say that from my experience of the law in Ghana, I believe that there are the bodies of laws in Ghana. There are a lot of laws that really has to do with rights of the citizen and by extension the rights of the consumer. There are a number of laws in Ghana we can have the constitution, there are enactment of parliament, there are rules and others and regulations, there are the common law and there are existing law. So all this hierarchy of laws and all these laws that are in existence, though they may be scattered, but there are a lot of laws in existence that we have not even tested the law at all. We have not really stretched the law to the extent that the rights that are, as I said, rights are owed, or applied to individuals or groups. But I believe that there are a lot of laws or quite abundant body of laws that when one has an issue, one can really seek redress in the law court. For instance, in the torts law, a tort is an act or omission that gives rise to an injury of harm to another, and it amounts to a civil wrong for which the court imposes a liability. So the primary aims of civil laws or tort laws is to provide relief to the injured parties. So if you went to buy a product and you were injured by the product because the product was not safe, or maybe you want to buy a drink and you saw some impurities or some impurities that are settled at the bottom of the bottle, you feel injured, and that by your injury and the law of torts, you can seek relief or redress from the law courts. And I believe that if you are injured as a consumer and you speak to your lawyer, you will definitely get some relief from the courts. I endorse the fact that we need to have a kind of laws that are put together to address specific issues of the consumer. But while we are not there yet, and as it was said by the previous speakers, we have a bill in respect of consumer rights, which is still awaiting passage in Parliament. I believe the bill has been there for over 10 years. Just recently, I heard from the Minister of Trade and Industry talking about the fact that the government is going to give a very serious consideration to the passage of the bill to become law or an act of Parliament. Let's hope that it comes through as quickly as possible. But while we are waiting, I still believe that there are a lot of laws that are available, whether from the constitutional perspective, whether from enactments, passed in Parliament, whether in rules, regulations, and all this, whether there are common laws, whatever, there are all bodies of laws that consumers can take advantage of. And I believe that as we go through the conversation and the discussion of this morning, we'll be able to go to the specific laws that are in existence that are able to address the specific injuries that individual consumers incur in the course of their consumption. I hope that as we travel along, we'll be able to address all these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Reverend. And let's put our hands together once again for him. So we've moved to our interactive segment. What we're going to do is, if you have any question at all, just note them. You can write them down. And those joining us virtually, if you have any question at all, just also note them. I'm going to engage them for some minutes, after which I will just hand over to you if you have any question or any thoughts to share with us, or any questions for them at all. There are one or two questions I've picked on the Join News platform, of which I'll ask later. But let me start with you on this note, Reverend. There are microphones on the table. You have microphones that you can actually use. Reverend, you mentioned that there are lots of laws that actually talks on rights, lots of laws. But if a consumer has a problem with a company, is there a particular law that that consumer can rely on? Let's just say a telecommunication company, and I have challenges with that telecommunication company due to their services. Is there a particular law that I can actually rely on and take that telecommunication on? Yes, Reverend.
Well,
yeah.
Yes, if, let's say, a consumer of telecommunication service, something goes wrong, obviously, I believe that when we look at the Public Utility Regulatory Commission, which has been established to regulate some of these matters, a consumer who has been a consumer whose rights have been infringed upon because a service provider has not been able to meet his needs very well can seek redress through the commissions. Okay, so there are a number I may not be able to cite specifically, but I can assure you that there definitely are rules and laws that if you look, you talk to your lawyer, depending on the nature of the wrong. Depending on the nature of the wrong and depending on the nature of the liability, I believe that definitely there are laws that will be able to assist you in dealing with your issue.
Okay. We have Theo, yes. Yes, Theo, yeah.
All right, so I hear my learned colleague, he keeps saying, and when you speak to your lawyer, and when you speak to your lawyer, I am a lawyer.
Okay.
But how many people, A, want to go to a lawyer to resolve their 20 cedis? Yeah. B, how many people can afford a lawyer to resolve their 20 cedis? So there should be a single point of contact, a single place that I go, and I know that my matter will be resolved. There are about 20 different legislations governing the telcos alone, all right? And then when you add on all the other industries, you're looking at about 100, okay? You need to have intimate knowledge of contract law, offer acceptance, intention to create legal relationship, consideration, in order for you to have redress. And what we're saying is that it ought not to be so. I don't want to go into a forest full of laws to go and find out which law applies to me. I want to be able to go one-stop shop, one person who tells me this is how it is, and all the operational background. So if we have a Citizens Advice Bureau, a commissioner, or an ombudsman, that will save us all the wahala. And that's not taking money or meat out of the lawyer's mouth, because there will always be work for us lawyers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Quick information, we're going to go off on Joy News, but those watching us on Joy News and others, we can quickly get us on the CIMG Facebook page. We're streaming live there, so we're going off Joy News anytime now, actually. Let me move to Agnes. Within the health sector, you might know the consumer protection right.